Hello, welcome back, everybody. Please be seated. We're going to be starting our first panel today's afternoon, which will be on social justice and safe spaces for trans Londoners, and it is chaired by Rico Jacob Jace, who is with Transactual and who will be introducing his panel. Thank you, Rico, for chairing.
Well, first I'd like to say thank you all for coming. I know that it's a Friday and you probably want to sort of leave and head straight to the bars and pubs, but you know, we've got to do some social justice before we get going. So a bit about myself. My name is Rico Jacob Chase. My pronouns are him. I'm a black trans guy. And this particular panel here is about social justice and safe spaces for trans Londoners, but I'm sure you've all been talking about trans rights the entire week. So just so we have some active listening, everyone will take a deep breath, sort of chill, shake off some of that dark energy and get into the room. Thank you very much. I've been doing a lot of therapy and gotta spread the love. Okay, so the pandemic saw an increase in hate crime against trans communities, and this situation continues to worsen as we approach 2020. There have been very few trans-owned-led community spaces in Greater London, and just one black QT POC-owned space. An insecure funding landscape, a lack of pathways to community ownership, and a competitive over limited resources currently ensure the ongoing absence of safe spaces. Effectively, there isn't many resources, as a lot of us have mentioned earlier, and therefore when it comes to grant applications, we have a lot of organisations fighting for a very, very small amount of funding. So this first panel, we're going to run through hate crime and access to alternative sources of justice, intersects and disadvantages, disparities, discrimination, for example, the impact of racism, financial inequality, ableism, and trans Londoners, the importance of culture, venue, and safe common spaces. So I've got a brilliant panel lined up for you today. Some of them don't need introduction, but we're going to run through it anyway, so you get to know who's here. So I'd like to start on this end. So Stephanie, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Stephanie Robinson. I served 14 years in the Metropolitan Police Service. That was working in the office environment in different sort of roles. The last 6.5 years I was an analyst for serious sexual offences. 9 of those years I volunteered as a frontline police officer, so I could actually understand what it's like to be in uniform and on the front line. I then co-founded and chaired the National Trans Police Association, which is now absorbed into the LGBT+ network. I remain on the independent advisory group for LGBT issues, so I still feed into the police. I'm not completely divorced, as I retired in August. And I'm currently now with Oasis Church, which is LGBT, very affirming church. But they're not just a church, they're a foundation. And the reason why I like this particular organisation is that they manage over 50 secondary academies. Now remember, LGBT affirming, managing over 50 academies. And the greatest thing that I think is going to help us going forward, probably not in the now but in future time, is that they've taken over by government agreement the management of what we used to know as a borstal. That's going to be called a secure school in 2022. And the hope is a new way of dealing with these individuals from what they've learned from the academies is going to take them forward to be more accepting of everybody rather than things that we see with young people like antisocial behaviour and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's great opportunity within Oasis. And I also run their faith-based transgender support group called Torch.
Great. I mean, it's important to recognise that just because you're a member of the trans and non-binary community, you still don't necessarily have to not be part of religious groups. That's a really important point to make there. So, Zee, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, how am I gonna?
Apologies.
I think I have to just leave. Hi everyone, so my name is Zee, pronounced they, she, they. I use that interchangeably. I am actually from the Netherlands. I came here a couple of years back, actually 5, not a couple. And mainly just worked on youth, youngsters. I'm currently at Stonewall UK, where I I'm a big researcher, I love researching, but I create the training sessions at Stonewall that we will then teach to companies and organizations who want to. And besides that, I am a poet, I'm a writer, I'm a blogger, write on the intersectionalities of being both queer, non-binary, of course talking about my race, and also neurodivergent, which there's a lot overlap between gender diversity and being neurodivergent, and we need to start talking about that. And yeah, not that much, just that's what I do.
It probably was too much.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
No,
It's really
he's
amazing.
incredibly humble. They're a well-respected member of the community. We can ignore them. Next, would you like to introduce yourself?
It's a very hard act to follow after these two previous speakers. Hi everyone, I'm Danny. I'm a councillor from Camden, like our host, she's called Sean. It's great to be here today. I'm a cabinet member in Camden for planning and regeneration and economy, as well as culture. And in my day job, the other side of what I do, when I'm not being a councillor, I also work for the National AIDS Trust as head of policy, but I'm here today mainly to talk, I think, about sort of the role of the local authority in addressing some of these really important issues. So thanks for inviting me.
No, thank you for coming. Allies all around. We're going to talk about some of the work you've done recently. But no, thank you for coming. Next, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Saxon Hales. I'm an LGBT hate crime worker for Metro Charity at the moment. I joined them in 2018. Prior to that, I was in the Met Police for 9 years in Lewisham as a frontline response team officer. And I was also the LGBT liaison officer down there. I'm also the co-chair of Lewisham LGBT Forum and parent of three. I mean, you know, I don't know how list you want to go.
It's basically no one on the panel likes to sleep. That's what I got.
Gets to sleep.
So first question. I think I'll just let anyone answer any of the questions, just have a sort of casual discussion. But the first question is, how can London become a safer city for trans communities? And I'll say that again. How can London become a safe city for trans communities? And I'll start with you.
Thank you. One of the things that I think even Saxon will agree with me, within an organisation called the Metropolitan Police Service, is the fact that it's transitional internally. People move in, they move through the ranks. There's always this fluid motion. The problem with fluid motion is that you can set up a really good scheme that is actually delivering safely, really good schemes, and then suddenly the command changes, and unfortunately egos come in, different egos, destroy everything and want to rebuild but with their brand on it. And I've long since argued this has to stop. My view is going back a couple of years, we tried to set up a trans forum with senior officers in the Met Police, plus members from the trans community, to actually start this dialogue going. But exactly what I have said to you, new commanders came in, the whole thing died because they wanted something different, and it didn't even get a chance to get lifted off. What I think we need to do is to find some way of being able to mandate the organisation to keep something going if it's working. Because if we keep going around this merry-go-round over and over and over again, we're never going to get anywhere. If we can mandate it and say, Commissioner, 5-year term, next Commissioner, you have to do this. Government says you have to do this. I think then we've got a way forward. But while it's in this constant transition internally, I think it's going to be very difficult to sustain anything, is my personal opinion.
Okay. I mean, just for the audience and for myself, I mean, which body actually has that authority to sort of mandate it?
I would probably start that with Sophie Linden, MOPAC, who I know and have had various meetings with. But I think we need to really start to develop that dialogue going forward and to see if we can get government to say, Met Police, you need to do this. Things that work and things that really serve the community need to be sustained, and not this constant churning, different people coming in and then shutting things down and starting something new. I know this is the way the system works, probably works the same here, but at some point that change has got to stop. If we're going to develop it, then let's develop it, but as a continuum.
Saxon, any thoughts on that? Do you think it's a sort of similar issue, or do you think there's more that we need to do?
I mean, just in terms of the Met Police, I mean, it's endless, isn't it? I mean, there's so much to, I don't even think they would know, because, yeah, you know, they get rid of all the good stuff that happens, and so much of it is dependent on individuals. So you'll have a few good officers who then make everything else a bit of a postcode lottery. So you'll have, like, back when they had LGBT liaison officers, like, there was, like, a certain group of them that were brilliant, and then there were lots of people that were just using it for internal promotion. You know, that's, and what will work in one borough isn't necessarily transferable to another borough, because it would depend on the support externally as well, like what is in that borough from the community, what kind of support people have, what kind of relationships they have with the community. So, like, I mean, don't even get started. It's really, I mean, it's more about, I think, for London, is for there's two questions, right? What do we actually want as a community? What will make us feel safe? Where do we think we need to go? And then it's what is possible, I suppose, what we can, like, try and pull together. Have we got the capacity ourselves? You know, because I think, you know, there's not that many of us in the room today, but we're probably the ones, just because we've got here today, that have more capacity than other members of our community. So how do we support those people, like, until the point where we've also burnt out or got overwhelmed, or our lives have changed to such a degree that suddenly we have to hand those batons over? And I think, you know, that's the problem with the trans community. We've got a lot of other stuff going on in our own lives. You know, it's just about how can we build something that continues as well. There's, like, the archive continues, so that even if your, you know, really enigmatic leader suddenly can't do it, it's okay, because all the stuff is still there for the next person to stand up and go, okay, well, I won't do it exactly the same way, but we've got the good basis stuff.
It requires a proper handover, which is something that has been sadly lacking in my experience.
And I think we also just need to feel safe ourselves, don't we? I think, like, if you ask me, like, when do I feel safe? Like, in all those mindful meditations, I have a proper freak out, because I don't think there's ever any bit where that I've actually felt safe. And so then you're asking yourself, well, what is it that is going to make me feel safe post-pandemic? What can I do? Well, who can I surround myself with? And it is largely those, you know, those proper allies who genuinely never take a step wrong with you, who always have the right things to say, and they are so precious and rare in your lifetime sometimes. But it's having those as your kind of, like, security, to then go, right, how can we then use that as my anchor and then build upon it, so that then I can build that space for other people, because only we know what is going to make ourselves feel safe, but then hopefully that will also apply to other people, you know.
That's a really important point. Like, there's no amount of spirituality or healing that's going to actually address the actual problem, the root causes of hate crime. But leading on to like the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of people that were saying that once you go into a police force, you're no longer a POC. You go into the police force, and therefore you're now painted blue. Could you possibly draw some parallels with the trans individuals that are in the police force? Do you feel as if once you're in the police force, you don't have a voice or part of the overall organisation?
The police are broken up into command structures. It very much depends on the command structure you're in. They have to live the policy. It's a cultural change that's needed, and that doesn't come overnight. But there are some people in commands that it's absolutely working brilliantly, and it's all going in the right direction. And other commands where I know of officers, because I'm in contact with my friends, they're not just colleagues or former colleagues, they're friends, where it's going severely pear-shaped. How can you have such a diverse situation in an organisation like the Met? It's because it's massive. It's big, it does all the policies at the top, but it needs to be lived down through the command structure, would be the way I would see that going forward. So yes, they do like to cast everyone as blue, but they understand, at least in policy, that people are from all these different directions.
Z, what's your thoughts on this? As a member of the Black community, do you feel as if we sort of hit the nail on the head, or there's more that needs to be done?
Yeah, of course. Always. I think there's often this misunderstanding that one will speak for all, right? And that is definitely also not what I'm doing. I'm not going to speak for all. I can only speak for one person, and that is myself. From what I know, like, I moved here from the Netherlands actually back in the day because I actually didn't know at that time that I was looking for a place where I could belong, right? And London was that place because it's so broad and big, and it was UK Black Pride that made that change for me. And I also volunteer there at the moment, of course. And so when it comes to the Black community, we are not a monolith. And I think now, finally, unfortunately, we had to again have something as horrible as the George Floyd situation happening that could create a language, but often Black people need to die first for that to happen. And that is the horrible and that is the painful thing, is I could create language because George Floyd was just it. It was done, and we are still done. And now we're going back to, if we are diving into Black trans people, specifically Black trans women, we are not even, there is no language for it, because every time there is a language created, that person will get stripped. There's a lot of issues regarding police brutality towards Black trans, and of course, the issue in general, if we're looking at it systematically, and this is where I, as a researcher, and I call myself a lifelong researcher, is I love to look into these things. I am neurodivergent, meaning I love looking at patterns. If something doesn't make sense, it does not make sense, and I'm gonna look into it until it does. And the biggest thing is there's a systematic issue, meaning the system is already set in binary thinking. And here we come as gender fluid people trying to live in between, and that's not possible, right? So when it comes to Black as in not as a monolith, for me personally, everything has to focus on community, and that's of course we're gonna be talking a bit more about that, but community is very important. Creating safe spaces is very important. Also spaces where white people are just simply not allowed, and I'm gonna say it out loud, it's not allowed because of the issues that has been faced. And even if white people are super nice, nicety is not gonna help, right? Because we saw Black Lives Matter movement, and that's still happening. Black Lives Matter is a start. And again, it's a start based on somebody who was killed. So we have to really consider when it comes to using enforcement from law, where did this start, right? There was an amazing exhibition, I forgot the name of the exhibition, but it talks about the sus laws, right? So the stop and search. We have the exact same here in the UK, we have the exact same in the Netherlands. We have the exact same in Belgium. It doesn't matter where you go, Western, it's one and the same, right? So when we're thinking about law enforcement, I love to think about the start. When did it start? And then we go into colonialism. We're not going to dive into that, but it goes very deep. And I think because of the history where white and Black was separated, that is where the binary thinking also came, right? Patriarchy, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to go into it, but we're not a monolith. Trans people are, of course, even as important. Non-binary, I identify as non-binary, not a monolith. But making sure that there are communities just like this space where we can talk about it, that is very, very important. I don't know if I answered your question, but...
It's okay, no, you touched on some really important points there. No, I think... Oh, speak up. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
I'll bring my
up.
Brittany mic a bit closer. There. So, I guess... Yeah, I mean, we all know that in the US, when it comes to police officers, the police was actually created after slavery ended. I think it was the same year slavery ended. So they were created in order to protect assets and to enforce control. So, I mean, in the UK, it was created in order to, similar things, to maintain assets and just keep control. So, unfortunately, they weren't designed with the idea of a community and creating safe spaces. And I think that's just the way the cookie crumbles. That's not to say that the police haven't had a really important point in maintaining law and order, but I think that's an important point to make there.
But that does, like, if we want to do something else.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that, you know, having been a police officer, I'm aware of the feeling of the LGBT community towards the police. I think it's important to say that there are other options, though, depending on obviously the level of hate crime you've received. But I do like the holistic approach to things. If you're not well enough, for whatever reason, or you're not capable enough to deal with the police and the court system and all that nonsense, which, to be fair, takes a lot out of you, what are the other options? If it's something relatively, I would say, what the police would consider low level, it might not be for you, but what might be for what the police would consider low level. So someone has called you a name in the street, especially if you know that person. Again, it's like also ages, situations. Are there community resolutions? What reparations would make you feel better about a situation? You know, if it's your neighbour, would it help if they got moved out? Like, can we put something in place so that evictions work a lot quicker? Because at the moment, like the people I'm supporting, it's much quicker to move a victim than it is to move a suspect. Evictions take years, whereas I could get someone moved under a mutual exchange in a far less time. And if you're looking at someone's well-being and what would make their life better, it could be like get the suspect out quicker, because moving is a massive upheaval for most people. And like I said, we've got enough going on as it is. Get the suspect, punish them, not the victims. So things like that could help. It's around, like, yeah, would it help just to be able to tell your story to someone? Would it help to know that the person that did it to you has gone on a training course about trans stuff and knows a bit more about what you've gone through, what it's like, you know, the sort of just endless problems that just existing can cause. It's not even about someone calling you something in the street. It can just be like the fact that like every form you have gives you a 20-minute dysphoria battle of which box do I pick, male or female, because they're the only two they've given me. You know, all that stuff. You just kind of think, well, what, for you, as a person that has had this awful experience, what would make you feel better? And I think there needs to be a better exploration around the other options, and also how can we enable all those other people that witness stuff to be those active bystanders, to distract people, to like get you out of that situation. That's not necessarily ring the police. It can just be make sure you're okay and like escort you home so that you don't feel like you're going to get further attacked or whatever.
No, it's true. I mean, just quickly, like high level, what tips would you give someone who has experienced hate crime? Like, what will they do in order to have a conversation with the police? Like, how would you facilitate this discussion? It's just very, very high level before. Yeah,
I don't even suggest police initially. It is literally what does that person want to happen next? I mean, like, what would help them right this second? And actually, a lot of people, the hate crime is not the number one issue that they need to address right now in their life. The issue might be, I have got kids that I need to get to school and they've been excluded, or I've got a disability that is causing me daily pain and I'm not able to get a GP, you know.
When it comes to that, I think, I mean, especially in London, there are a lot of amazing small, I don't want to say organizations, but there's one space, they have like a DJ night, I've forgotten the name as well, where actually they provide taxis for people who are trans, non-binary, to go from their space to, you know, going home. So it's actually just before that even could be a possibility of actually having you know, sort of a system in place so that the people who go from one safe space, that it doesn't end the moment that they walk or get outside, right? So it's really starting to think in advance, even during when you're creating an event, even if you're creating an organization, thinking about, right, I'm going to create an organization, yes, zero policy, et cetera, but then also who might be the people who are going to be there, and can we provide a safe space, right? And that is where, when it comes to disability or neurodivergency, all those things come into place, where, and this organization or this company does it really well, where they just provide, and now we see it a lot more, where people are providing taxis just so that people can pick them up, and it's free, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't cost anything, and it's community led, and that is perfect, right? So it is talking about what can be done before we even, and then let the police only be used for the things that are really, like, you know, I wouldn't say necessary. I mean, hate crime is as necessary as, but that is definitely a lot of prevention already. And I think that's also where sort of, you know, the funding could go to, right? Because that makes it that is where you sort of have the autonomy of the individual.
Yeah, I mean, but that's really, really important point there. I think that now we've kind of like established where we are as society and how we need to protect the most vulnerable members of us. Danny, should we talk more about investment? So we've worked out where we are, what the problem is, the root cause. So the Mayor's Office Recovery Programme is the mission of building stronger communities is by 2025, all Londoners will have access to a community hub, ensuring they can volunteer, get support, and build stronger community networks. So what are your thoughts on that, Danny? What could community hubs look like for trans London communities?
Thanks. Just on the previous discussion, incredibly powerful to hear. I would say, I think, yes, we need to look at prevention, stopping it happening in the first place, but we must not let the police, and we must not let people like me, we must not let councils and service providers off the hook. And I think there is a risk. I understand how incredibly difficult it must be to put yourself forward in a very vulnerable position, knowing that those systems are not set up in a way to deal with you, who you are, in a way that you need to go forward and say, I've been a victim of hate crime. But I think if we don't, we're letting those systems off the hook. We're not demonstrating that there's a problem, they're not delivering. And as easy as said and done, I know, and I've been a victim of homophobic hate crime myself, and I've not reported to police, so slightly hypocritical. But I really passionately believe we have to name this more. We have to say hate crime. We have to say this is happening and it's not being dealt with. And decision makers, councils, national decision makers, police and public services have to step up and do their part and change, so you don't feel, and your clients don't feel like that. But yes, everything you said I completely agree with. I mean, in terms of what you said, creating community hubs, I think, as you touched on, it can look really different. I think it's what people want and what members of the trans community need. There's some really dry stuff that councils can do, some dry stuff we're doing, but really important stuff. So actually trying to protect those places through planning policy. So I'm responsible for planning in Camden, and through our local plan, through our planning policies, we've specifically tried to protect LGBTQ places. Huge loss of them in London, as everyone probably knows. We've managed to kind of stem the decline, I think, and actually have some fantastic new spaces opening. Zodiac, hopefully some of you know it. Go if you haven't, it's on near Warren Street. Zodiac was actually a trans-led LGBTQ space. It's just opened a couple of weeks ago. It's not easy to do, and actually people like me, we have an active role in supporting people interested in running those spaces to navigate the system. So licensing, hard to get a license in London, and people like me have a responsibility to advocate for that organisation, and we advocated at licensing committee for them to get a late licence, which is the difference between that being possible and not. About listening to trans organisations, members of the trans community, about what spaces they need, and trying to respond in carving out those spaces. There's huge opportunities, that always is, to create spaces, community organisations and groups, and also councils often, despite our funding constraints, we can still fund community organisations, and we do. And as you said, in Camden we've got the Forum Plus organisation that we still continue to fund. It's about councils and authorities, it's difficult financially, actually making conscious decisions about who and how they support, I think, trans organisations.
No, I think that's a beautiful point right there, because as Dean mentioned, safe spaces really do make a difference. It's just an opportunity for people who are of the same demographic, or race, community background, in order to sort of share stories, not actually have to discuss hate crime and what's actually happened in the outside world, and just to effectively heal. So that's a really, really important point there. We also had the article recently in Pink News about the crossing, the sort of trans crossing. So thank you very much.
No worries. I've got scars on my back for that, but yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too internally focused about it. It was really difficult because there was a lot of hate. I mean, a lot of hate mail, emails, phone calls, messages. I had to turn off kind of my phone and stuff. Like, a load of abuse about that. But I think that kind of demonstrates why it was worth it. A simple thing like a crossing, you think, who would object to a crossing? And what I found most disturbing is how, and I'm sure everyone here is aware of it, just how the anti-trans lobby mask their objections through concerns about others, and try and use other groups and divide us as communities, whether it's the gay and lesbian community trying to be divided from our trans brothers and sisters, or in this case actually saying that this crossing impacted disabled communities. And I think looking at the huge amount of hate and abuse, fundamentally, none of those people were expressing personal problems. It was all masked, I think, fundamentally. It was transphobia being masked as concern for others. And yeah, I think we were really passionate about making a big statement about our support as an organisation. It's just a crossing, it won't change much, we know. There's more we need to do as an organisation, as an employer. But we wanted to make that statement for the trans community in Camden, in London. We're proud to have done it. Certainly we'd do it again. And actually hearing from members of staff of Camden, trans members of staff, how they felt about it, I think made it completely worth it. And I think, as you were saying, allies need to stand up. They can't all just be the trans community that have to make change happen. We have to listen, we have to support you when you need it, and we have to be there fighting by your side, I think.
No, thank you for that. No, I think that's a really, really important point to make, that actually visibility does matter. And it's not necessarily focusing, I mean, trans people were not all one-dimensional, we're all always hate crime. I think the focus is always on the negative side, but they're also members of trans joy, and it's a massive statement of allyship. So if you were speaking to a councillor, a different constituent, what sort of recommendations would you give someone who isn't part of the LGBT community and wants to extend allyship?
I think listen, first and foremost. Like, I'm very conscious of my privilege. I don't assume that I know all the answers. My kind of, I was very much pushing for that crossing, for example, and some other stuff that we've done. It's joining the Stonewall accreditation, which I think is a really powerful statement at the moment, particularly. I did that having listened to my friends and other colleagues who are trans, who are experiencing the difficulties they're experiencing, and I felt really compelled to act. I would say to people, listen, understand what people are saying to you from the trans community, ask if they need support, chat, be there by their side, understand the difficulties, and be there when they need you.
I think the big challenge, and I come back to my earlier point, if we started something now, how the heck do we sustain it going forward? If, say for example, we know that there's going to be a new mayor in 2 years' time, how do we get that to carry across? How do we get that to be sustained financially? Because we could set up a really good system and it could all come crashing down with a change of leadership.
Well, to point on that, so again, I love research, and I came across this. I'm gonna pick up my phone real quick, and I'll just, when it comes to sustainability, there is a lot of interesting ways of like why it is so difficult to be sustainable, right? And I came across this research, and it's called, and it's by the European Parliament Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights, and it's called a tip of the iceberg: religious extremist funders against human rights for sexuality and reproductive health in Europe, which said that between 2009 and 2018, report identifies 707 million in anti-gender funding from 2009 to 2018, right? And during that time, the UK was part of the EU in that sense. And they came from Russia, from the US, and from Europe. And this is from 2008. So, and what is interesting, and for people who want to know that, I will just send you the document because it's online. What is so interesting is that when it comes to power, when it comes to sustainability, sustaining power, keeping the power, it doesn't matter for the far right if they hate each other, because they have very different views. But the only thing that keeps them there is the power. They want to keep the power, and they don't care how they use it, they keep it, right? So since 2008, and that whole process, and it's an amazing, even though horrible and extremely evil, just the way that anti-gender funding is being sort of from different groups all over the world. People come together.
Sorry, we only have like 5 minutes left.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll just finish. I'll just finish on that. People actually come together, and that's why sustainability, when it comes to funding, is as important. But also the active allyship is as important as well, right? Because there are people who really go against that.
What we need to understand is that the extreme religious right, Christians primarily, get lots and lots of funding and millions absolutely millions in what we call dark money is coming into Europe, into the UK, to overturn the rights that we enjoy at the moment.
Yeah.
And we need to be quite acutely aware of that.
Yeah, like the Global Philanthropy Fund did like a research in the US tax returns, and in the same time period that the anti-trans movement received funding of about 4 billion, the entirety of the LGBT movement received 1.2 billion. And effectively what that statistic says is that they're incredibly well funded and incredibly well organised.
Yeah.
So even though we're necessarily seeing a lot of anti-trans media, I think there was one article in The Guardian every day. It was just kind of like ridiculous statistics. Doesn't necessarily mean that politicians should acknowledge that that's the views of the majority. But just quickly, just around this panel, so we can ask some questions from the audience. So the LGBT Plan for London recovery mission for London trans communities is, by 2025, London will be the most trans-inclusive city in the world, offering a range of publicly funded, safe, accessible, trans-led specific services to community spaces. So how do you think the best way / strategic approach would be to achieve this mission? So effectively, like square one, looking at today, what can we do moving forward? Z, do you want to start? You're looking very thoughtful.
I'm still formulating.
I'll go. Right. So one of the main things that used to come out from the Pan London LGBT Forums Network stuff was that that people said that the LGBT people needed to own a property, because if you own the property, you're not constantly paying out on all the fees and stuff. So you know, like some of the old museums in London have been like, and some of the police stations. Have literally been donated and said that will always be used as a police station, and once it's not a police station, it has to be, like, you know, sold back to the community. So maybe that kind of thing, that's like someone says that there's a place in every London borough where that is now designated always an LGBT space for whatever is going to work in that particular area. Because I appreciate London is a varied place, and what works, like I said, might differ. So I think that's a good start. Even if you do it as a trial in one place, it's not going to be perfect. We're all infallible. We're all just going to be making it up as we go along. But if we own it, we'll have that sense of it's ours. We might all chip in and feel like it is our community space, that we'll bring our own paint, and it will be like the 80s again, and activism will like restart. You know, maybe that's the ground where we need to start from.
I think I do think that, yeah, based on that, yeah, there's one, I mean, I think there's an LGBT community now getting funded to actually create one of those. I mean, of course, I have to put in UK Black Pride, right? They just created this report talking about how important it is still to have safe spaces. Again, and I do have to say this, which is only for Black and brown people. Sometimes even there's an intersectionality of Black and brown, right? There are certain things where specifically African in ancestry, and talking about that is only within one group. And when you're talking about different cultural aspects, like really making sure that every time you're putting up an event, every time you're talking to an individual, you're listening to them and with them instead of for them. And I think that is sort of where we actually have to start. The individual has that story, and actually just like listening to them, like you said. Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a massive thing. It can
Exactly,
just be
it
like
doesn't.
Zoom
Just
has.
to start, we have
Exactly.
like 2 minutes, so we have to keep it short. Danny, what are your
Wow,
thoughts?
2 minutes, how do we do this? 1 minute. Well, I think it's probably not going to be one thing. There's so much change that we need to make. I think keep having conversations like this. Let's not go away until it happens. Let's keep on it. Let's keep at them, decision makers. I mean, we're going, you know, political geekery, we're going to borough council elections next May. So in your areas, speak to your council candidates, speak to your council parties. What's in their manifesto? Are they committing to this? If not, why not? This should be embedded in every single council's approach for the next 4 or 5 years. And fundamentally, actually the people in power, people like me, we need to represent the whole community. There needs to be more trans politicians, there needs to be more trans councillors. So stand for council, be candidates. I know it's difficult, and allies like myself need to support you to do it.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Oasis have been trying for the last 2 years to buy the police station next door to turn that into a community hub, which would be an ideal model to see how this could actually work without necessarily costing us. So I think that's something that could be considered.
I mean, I've got to plug my friends. So there is a new venue that opened up in Shoreditch. It's called Glass House, and it's LGBT friendly. There's like trans books all over the place, so that's one of the places which you could go, which is a safe space. They also do yoga, which is great. Yeah, so I mean, questions from the audience before we wrap up. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
So talking about making London more trans inclusive, like I think we still have to talk about products, but for me as a trans person, like one thing that stops me, like if I want to go to a safe space, if I want to be out in public, knowing that I might not be able to find somewhere where I can use the toilet without being harassed is a really big thing. And like, I'm quite young, but I feel like when I was growing up, London had like public toilets, and like they seem to be disappearing. And if you go to Paris, like I love it for a lot of reasons, but it has like free public toilets in the streets, and they're like automatically cleaning, gender neutral. So yeah, that's one like basic thing that I'm like, why is London not doing this if we want to be like inclusive?
Issue every trans person with a radar key, so you can at least use the disabled toilets.
Any questions? Yes.
Could I just come in here? I'm Caroline Russell, I'm chair of the Health Committee on the London Assembly, and Andrew Goff, who's from the Conservative group, I'm from the Green group. The Health Committee launched a report today about public toilets, the fact that there are not enough of them, they are a public health imperative, and there should be a duty on local authorities to provide public toilets, and there should be funding from government to enable that to happen. But properly funded public toilets are way, way better than trying to get in and use a toilet in a cafe or whatever, where it's you don't know for certain that you're going to be allowed to use a toilet. So,
Yeah, they were shut during the pandemic, weren't they?
It's on the case with toilets, but we're not there yet.
Any other questions? Yes.
So if we're aiming in 2025 to be the most trans inclusive city, yet the country that we're situated in is gradually and quite fastly falling in the rankings of trans inclusive countries, how do you think that we could go about creating this to be a trans inclusive place that's better than everywhere else in the world, when we're in a place that is not the best in the world?
Anyone want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. What a massive question. Firstly, I don't know the answer definitely, but my sense is, I think we probably saw the same thing with the gay rights movement. Actually, London kind of leading the way in saying how the country needed to change, how it could change, how it wouldn't be the end of the world as we knew it, as perhaps the Daily Mail was describing or the Telegraph, but actually demonstrating what can happen and actually how communities can come together. And actually it makes us all the better, and actually all richer and more inclusive and more successful as a result. So I would say London has a crucial leadership role as our national city. But fundamentally, as a politician, I'd say we need to change the government too. But a non-political point, I think we can all show leadership in London to the rest of the country too.
And I think that we should never underestimate, when it comes to visions and missions, people are often, they put those things out there and they talk really, I mean, it's an amazing sentence, but for me, that sentence only comes from communities. They do not come from governments. We know this. I'm sorry, I gotta say it. We see it, right? It is about that individual. Again, UK Black Pride is an amazing example, and I've been growing because of them. I'm on this board because that organization and that group is speaking on behalf of or for and with UK BAME people. So for me, it's really about the grassroots movements. It's about the everyday, the people who are everyday. And I think that is also where, it's from bottom up, not top down, right? And that is, I think, what we need to keep on going.
Just quickly as well, I think the census results might be a big stir, because obviously no councils had a clue how many trans and non-binary people were in their boroughs. And once those results are released, I think it's going to be a massive kick for a lot of boroughs, because they suddenly go, oh my God, there's a massive population that we didn't know even existed, and they're going to have to feel obliged to provide things. So I'm hoping that will at least kickstart a lot of stuff in the next 2 years.
Any other questions? Yep.
So hate crime across the UK for LGBTQ is at a 10-year all-time high. What can we do as local authorities, as a group, to get that down? It's all well and good for us talking about having an inclusive society. If we can't get that number down, our work's just going to be pushed back.
I mean, funding schemes that target perpetrators is a good start, because everything is set up to support victims, but no one's out in there saying, don't do it in the first place, you idiots. And having those kind of social stigmas that if they do it, that they get like publicised as, this is your local idiot, everyone, boo, you know. So, because I think at the moment, I don't think there's enough, because the police aren't doing enough to get perpetrators named and chained, and there's nothing happening, especially for the trans community. I think in Lewisham there was like 1 conviction in the last 5 years, or no, not even conviction, sanction detection from a reported hate crime. So yeah, so if you can get some sort of action to say, don't do it for a start, and then it's just, yeah, like funding people that can support people in whatever needs they have for that. Because ironically, I think a lot of the funding for things like independent hate crime workers has disappeared. The Met has got rid of LGBT liaison officers, and their advisors aren't quite getting to the same standard as a lot of those other ones were. So yeah, like other projects that can assist, it would be great.
I would say enforcement, law enforcement, educate people to be aware that Section 28 didn't actually mention the LGBT curriculum, so people don't necessarily know about gay and trans people, so like trans people, non-binary people, so it's like another step that they haven't even addressed yet. Representation, like on adverts, billboards, like crossing roads, like our flag should be everywhere, people should understand what the flag actually means. So yeah, it's just like a re-education process.
And positive representation rather than
yes.
what's in the news and on, you know, Hollyoaks or whatever. you want the good news stories of people, not just.
One experience I'd like to share, if I may,
Yeah,
on this subject matter. I was getting hassled with gangs locally many years ago, but because I took the time and trouble to learn about the people in my community, what they were doing, you know, connecting with them, what I saw is that they pulled these guys to one side and gave them a right telling off. I did nothing, but I saw it happen, being pulled into corridors, and I thought, wow.
Active allyship. Yeah.
So I think there's a lot to be said on how we connect with our local community. And most people know my background. I'm not afraid of who I am, but I'm also very interested in people around me. And I think there's a big difference in how you sort of connect to your local community as to what kind of responses you get. You're going to get a rogue now and again, you always will. But I come back to the fact that that kind of pressure can really be helpful, and it's a community pressure, not police pressure.
That's true. That's very true.
I throw that in. Just
No, I appreciate that. Like allyship, I love good allies. I'm a diversity consultant. I meet allies all the time. I always get incredibly happy when I meet any. Sorry, last question at the back there. That's a really important point. Representation, we need to see it across board, positive representation, as you said. So we're going to have to wrap up there. So our closing statements. So what would you tell someone who's trans or non-binary experience hate crime, like in a word of empowerment? What do you want to start?
Yeah, I've always believed a simple quotation that I kind of invented, and that the impossible is only impossible if you believe it to be impossible. There's hope.
That's very true. There's always hope. See?
Damn.
We come back to you.
Yeah, I got to think about this.
I need you on the game.
I don't think I would say, I think would listen. I would say, what can I do to help you? Yeah.
That's very true. Allies all round.
Yeah, tap into the community actually, because there's a massive bank of information and knowledge everywhere, and if you can start tapping into it, actually people can find all that support stuff from within us most of the time. Just might have to travel all the way across London to get it.
Yeah. Personally, what really helped me was find your safe space. Like allies, just find your friends, find people who are
I was just about to say that. Yeah.
I'm sorry about
Because no, that's totally fine. Because this is the reason. This is why I moved here, right? So that's like, am I the right person to say this? Because I'm still very much in it.
Yeah.
But I came here. UK Black Pride was for me that where I found myself, right? Sometimes it for me is like same with Marsha P. Johnson. Sometimes you need other people so they can reveal yourself to you. And that is what UK Black Pride did. They revealed myself to me, right? So I think that is pretty much when people see me, I want them to see a bit of themselves, hopefully. But what I would say is, keep going.
Yeah.
I need to keep on going, and just keep going.
Perfect. We'll close on that note. Can I get a massive round of applause for our wonderful panel?